Hey y'all. So I wanted to talk a little bit about why I do not work with vegetarians and why I do not allow plant-based protein substitutes for people who come to work with me or come into any of my programs. You can send this if you want to a skeptical friend or a family member, or if you've asked the question, why won't you work with me even though I'm a vegetarian or a vegan? This is a primary answer to help you understand. So we have to understand protein first. Because a lot of people, when they argue that they can be perfectly healthy and they can heal on a vegetarian or vegan diet, they argue that, well, plants have protein too. And so if protein is a concern here, and it is, then I should still be able to get all the protein I need from plants. And while it is hypothetically, theoretically true, the reality of the situation makes it incredibly difficult, and there are other factors here that contribute to that just not being a viable or optimal solution for most people. So proteins break down into amino acids, and amino acids are super important as the building blocks of all the tissues in our body. So any kind of tissue turnover, tissue repair, or regeneration requires dietary protein. Protein also creates enzymes that are cofactors for every single chemical reaction that happens in the body. So protein is a truly essential nutrient. We cannot survive without consuming protein. There are 9 essential amino acids. So we eat protein and we need to get 9 essential amino acids in those proteins in order to function, in order to stay alive. There's about 22 amino acids in total, give or take. People debate on what all constitutes an amino acid sometimes, but around there. So 9 of them are essential.
Great.
7 are conditionally essential. This means that in a perfect circumstance, you can create them from those 9 essential amino acids. So we don't technically have to get them from our diet, but in any non-optimal situation, which would be any chronic health condition or any time we've been, wounded and need to regenerate tissue, in any kind of situation like that, if we've been sick, if we've been injured, anything like that. These 7 amino acids become conditionally essential. So it means, like, given the right circumstances or given the wrong circumstances, I guess, these actually become nutrients that we need to get from our diet as well. It's not, it's too much for our body to try to make all of these. So that's 16 amino acids that for a chronically ill person are necessary to get from the diet, so there's only a few that we don't have to worry about out of that 22. So these are going to be isoleucine and leucine and valine. Those are the main ones that athletes will supplement to help with their muscle mass. It's also lysine, which is super important for our immune function and also our collagen production. It also is naturally repellent to viruses. Methionine, which is really important for our detoxification pathways, phenylalanine, and tryptophan and threonine, which are precursors to a lot of our neurotransmitters, as well as cysteine and glycine, which are also really important to support our detox pathways, proline, which is a precursor to collagen, and a couple of others. So you can see how important those things are. This is talking about our detoxification pathways in the liver, our collagen production, our immune function, our muscle mass, our neurotransmitter production. All of these things are reliant on getting these amino acids from the diet. Now we need to look at where we get these amino acids, and it's true. A lot of these you can get in some amounts from plant foods. However, some of them you really can't very well. For example, the isoleucine, leucine, valine, those are much harder to get from plant sources. And some of the others are pretty hard as well, in the sense that there may be some plants that on paper it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that has a little bit of serine in it, or oh yeah, that has a little bit of, tyrosine in it. But when you actually add up how much of that plant you would have to eat to even meet your recommended daily allowance, it would have to be a lot, right? So we'll talk about that more in a moment. The reality is that calorie to calorie, these amino acids, especially the essential and conditionally essential ones, are much, much higher in nutrient density in animal foods. So it's going to be much easier to get all 16 of these without having to worry about combining different plant foods. Because you might get a little bit of this amino acid in this plant food, a little bit of this amino acid in this plant food, but you have to make sure you're getting this really wide variety and putting it all together, whereas all of these 16 amino acids are all going to be in all meats, no matter what. So you don't have to worry that you are getting the correct balance of these amino acids in the right ratios. It's just there for us, ready to go. So it requires a lot less thought and a lot more ease. So the other thing we need to talk about is bioavailability. And there is a score that has been developed. It's called the Protein Digestibility Corrected Amino Acid Score, or PDCAAS. PDCAAS. And basically it lists, from a digestibility standpoint, how much of those amino acids we are actually able to extract out of the food. So guess what's on the top of the list? Eggs and dairy. They have almost a 100% score. When you eat eggs and dairy, you actually absorb almost 100% of the amino acids in those foods. Below that a little bit is beef. Beef is very high, and then other meats like chicken, turkey, seafood, things like that, still very high in the 80 to 90% range. And then you get to things like beans, grains, nuts, seeds, the vegetarian proteins. And this ranges from usually 70 down to 50, 40, even 30. Some of the grains especially, even the ones that are supposedly high protein grains, if you look at how much of the protein your body is actually able to digest and absorb, it's very little. So even if you plug in how much protein am I getting from these black beans, for example, you're not going to actually be absorbing all of the protein that it's even telling you, on paper that is in that food. So that's a big deal, in terms of actually adding up how much of the amino acids total are in these plant foods, how much of that we are actually absorbing. Meat wins out every time. There's no way around it. The other thing is going to be a fatty acid imbalance. So there are polyunsaturated fatty acids, omega-6 and omega-3. Omega-3 are more anti-inflammatory, omega-6 are more inflammatory. Now that doesn't mean omega-6 is bad and omega-3 is good. I have clients who get very rigid about oh my gosh, I never should get any omega-6 in my diet ever. That's not true. We do need a balance of these. We need both an inflammatory and an anti-inflammatory response in the body. So it's okay to get some. But the problem is that these should be in a very strict ratio. These should be in a very strict balance. And because the seed oils that a lot of us are eating in a lot of processed food, it's skewed much, much higher towards the omega-6 in the modern Western diet. Now, when you eat a more ancestral diet that includes animal foods, this ratio starts to even out because animal foods actually have naturally a perfect ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. The plant fats are much skewed towards omega-6. So yes, this includes the, seed oils like canola oil that a lot of us have been definitely taught to avoid in processed food, but this includes just eating nuts, seeds, grains, and beans too. There's a couple of exceptions like walnuts, but for the most part, when you are eating grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds, you are getting much more omega-6 than omega-3, which again is okay in moderation. But when we are relying on that exclusively for our protein and we're not getting any animal foods, then we are going to have a very skewed omega ratio. And I actually, you guys, I actually really tried to figure this out. Like, I am making this video because I really wanted to try to figure out a way that vegetarians could get, a balanced omega-3/6 profile, enough of these amino acids that are precursors for our neurotransmitters. I actually really tried to make a brain healthy vegetarian protocol because I had so many people requesting it. I'm from a hippie town in Eugene, Oregon, where there is a lot of vegetarians. And so I was asked a lot, like, can you make like a brain healthy vegetarian protocol? And I tried. I like crunched the numbers. I spent way too long on this actually. And the diet I came up with, it was still deficient. It was still deficient in omega-3s. It was still deficient in total, amino acid intake, to really optimize your mental health. And it was such a weird diet. Like, it's not a diet that anyone would actually want to do. So it just doesn't work. I tried really hard and it just does not work. Okay, so the last point I'm gonna make here is about our carbohydrate intake, our fiber intake, and our calorie intake. So I really like my clients to get 60 grams of protein as an absolute minimum. And that's usually for people who maybe I'm trying to get them into therapeutic ketosis, and so we want to keep the protein moderate. Most people are actually going to do well at more like 80 to 120 grams of protein, or even more, especially if you're very active or you're a guy, you're a bigger person. You may want 150 grams of protein, 160 grams of protein. So that's a lot of protein to try to get from plants. Even the 60 grams of protein, you would have to eat about 4 cups of beans in a day just to get to that minimum of 60 grams of protein. And then we have to recognize, like, just that alone is 100 grams of carbs. And I usually don't recommend that people with metabolic dysfunction eat more than 100 grams of carbs a day. And if you have brain dysfunction or you have chronic illness, usually you do have blood sugar and metabolism issues. And so 100 grams of carbs is usually the highest I'm taking people. And that you're just getting from that 4 cups of beans, let alone anything else that you want to eat that day. It's also getting up to around 900 calories. And that's, again, going to add up, especially as we're adding other things. I'm assuming you're going to eat more than just that 4 cups of beans. Whereas if you're eating 8 ounces of steak, you are getting 60 grams of protein right there, just with 8 ounces of steak. That's just 2 4-ounce servings. That's very doable for most people, to eat, a 4-ounce steak with lunch, a 4-ounce steak with dinner. And then there's another meal that could be, more protein depending on your goals. But that's very doable for people. There's no carbohydrates in that. There's some healthy fats that have the balanced omega-3, omega-6 profile. And that's going to be more like 500 calories, right? So there's a lot more wiggle room for anything else that you want to add to your dishes that day. So the carbohydrate level is a problem. And then the amount of roughage is going to be a problem for a lot of people. Now, some people really thrive on a very high fiber diet, but I find that the more damaged your gut is, the more we have to moderate your fiber intake. Fiber is called roughage for a reason. It can be very rough on the gut lining. If you have a lot of inflammation there, it can really mess with your digestive health. And so 4 cups of beans a day is just going to be a nightmare for a lot of people with gut issues. And if we are not trying to just pack you full of nasty protein powders, and we're getting your protein from whole food sources, they're all going to be very high fiber sources. So digestibility, just sheer volume and roughage, carbohydrate levels, omega-3, omega-6 imbalance. I mean, these are just some of the reasons why I do not allow people to stay on vegetarian diets if they want to work with me. Now, I can be flexible with people on what animal foods you will eat. People have various reasons why they might be more comfortable with certain animal foods than others, for health reasons or for moral reasons or for, just personal reasons. So, if people are willing to do things like eggs and yogurt and seafood, even just that, I can sometimes work with, depending on the person. If you're willing to at least include some poultry, again, I can definitely work with that. I will say, however, that I find that most people do best when they are willing to include some amount of red meat in their diet. I have even had people notice that their mood disorders totally resolved just by adding beef back into their diet. So these are just things to consider. I hope it's a deeper explanation for why I have such a firm boundary around this, and maybe this is something that you can show a friend or a family member if they are not understanding your perspective here. Ultimately, we have to go with what is going to be most conducive to our health goals and allow us to have a brain that is nourished and healthy and thrives. So thank you for listening.